Okay, OCAR viewers. So, the freshly rebuilt C55, which I haven't even had time to make a video about getting back, has just broken down on the side of the road.
So let's find out what happened. There's good news and bad. All right, so if you're new to the channel, my name's Chris Cannons, and this is OCAR. I bought a C55 AMG about 2 years ago, I think it was. And I bought it because I thought it's an AMG, and they have a reputation for being really reliable. And one of them came up for 20 grand on car sales, and so I flew down to Sydney and picked it up. I bought it sight unseen off the internet, which maybe isn't always the best decision. Anyway, my first year of ownership were actually fantastic. It burned a bit of oil, but I got it for 20 grand. They tend to burn a tiny bit of oil. Mine was only really burning a little bit more than I'd seen on the forums, so I just wasn't that worried about it. I got it for quite cheap. They sort of were going for 30, 35, and then during COVID, I saw one go for 45 or 46, so I was like, yeah, I'm up on the deal, this is great. Eventually, it started burning quite a lot of oil, like a concerning amount, and then one day, it started misfiring, tried the usual things like coils and stuff like that. And I ended up taking the spark plugs out of the cylinder because I read the code and it said it was cylinder 8. And the spark plugs were covered in oil. So that's not great. That's generally a sign, especially because the other spark plugs were fine, generally a sign that something isn't great with the car. Anyway, so I just changed the spark plugs and was like, I'll see what happens. I did another 2,000 Ks, and then it happened again. This time it was actually, though, a little bit more gunked up. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe for some reason last time it was just a bit more sensitive. But I waxed some thicker oil in it, just put some thicker oil in it, see if that fixes the problem. Maybe it's just like a wear thing. It's 200 and something thousand Ks on it. We'll see how that goes. I ended up getting about the same out of that set of spark plugs, even with the newer oil. Just kept changing the spark plugs every 2,000 Ks, but it kind of was getting shorter each time, to the point that towards the end, I was kind of doing spark plugs every 600 Ks. It also got a lot worse when I was driving it hard, so I sort of had a feeling I knew what it was. What it could have been was basically valve stem seals, head gasket, or piston rings. But no one in the area was willing to pull apart the engine to find out. I know there would have been other ways of, finding these things out, but people didn't really want to work on the car. They were just like, just buy another one, because it's probably going to end up costing you more to fix it than it's going to be to just buy a different one. But I sort of had to think about it, and I was like, well, look, I paid 20 for this, and I would have to go pay 30 to get another one, and I wouldn't necessarily know that one wouldn't have a similar issue or a completely unrelated issue. And I know this car's problems. I know what I've had to fix. I really want to get it rebuilt, but the mechanic I was dealing with didn't want to do it. So a friend of mine actually recommended that he'd had an engine rebuild done by Melbourne Euro down in Melbourne, but I'm basically on the Gold Coast, so it's like a 20-hour drive. My mate was like, oh, well, I spoke directly with the boss when I had my rebuild done. Anyway, so I spoke directly with him, and he said, look, it's going to cost you a lot of money because I've never done this before, and I can't make heaps of money out of doing this, but I am willing to do it for you anyway. But if I'm going to tear it apart, I want to do everything. So my labor's going to be at least 15 grand. And I went, okay, and then 5 grand for parts, looking at about 20 grand. And he went, it's probably going to be more than 5 grand for parts. Anyway, I eventually kind of decided, you know what? For me, I would rather just have the car with the rebuilt engine than buying another one. I did look at the other ones out there, and everything that was kind of, less than 35 was pretty similar Ks to how many Ks my car has on it anyway. So I just decided it's not really worth it to me. I can now have an engine with effectively 0 kilometers on it in a car that I know, and already have a connection with, because you know how it is. You sort of feel sorry for cars when they're broken. So I went, screw it. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to get the car down there. So my partner and I drove the car down, which was an experience because it was doing spark plugs every, 400 or 500 Ks at this point, which just isn't ideal if you're going to be driving that far. But I think we ended up only doing the spark plugs twice. We only stopped once. We got the whole way to the Blue Mountains, which is about halfway before the first set of spark plugs. That was because it was just driving on the highway, so it was really low load. And then we got, kind of another half of the second half, so another quarter of the way down before we had to change the next set of spark plugs, except in that situation, I didn't have time to let the engine cool down as much as I did the night before. So there was a lot of burnt knuckles and stuff on engine components because the engine in that car gets really hot. Anyway, so got down to Melbourne, left the car with them. They had it for a few months because I was like, well, look, I don't have the money right now, but I can have the money by March next year. We're dropping off in kind of October or something like that. It might have been September. So I said, look, have it done by March next year. We'll come down for the Formula One because we want to do that anyway, and then we'll drive back. So I finally got the invoice only about 2 weeks before we came down. They really cut it close with finishing it. And let's have a quick walkthrough of what they actually did. So here we go. I'm looking at the invoice on my phone. I'll have it up next to me. So timing chain, piston set. Now the piston set on there was about $1,500. I actually spoke to him afterwards, and that was a mistake. It was actually $3,000 for all 8 pistons. Because I initially was like, oh, that sounds like one piston to me. Like maybe 2 pistons. I don't know why you'd only do 1 or 2 unless 1 or 2 were warped. But you'd think if another one was warped, it probably would have been having issues as well, rather than just the one cylinder. But it actually did all of the pistons. Rings, pin bushings, cylinder head bolts, gasket, engine mount kit, timing chain gasket kit, fuel level sensor, left-hand control arm, right-hand lower control arm, caster arms, tail shaft coupling kit, spark plugs 16 because it's a twin spark engine, so there's 2 spark plugs per cylinder. Oil cooler, stabilizer bar link, water pump thermostat, rear main steel, valve stem seal kit, crankshaft seal, drive belt, head reconditioning. Now, I did speak to them. They actually did bearings. They polished the crankshaft, I believe they said. So they'd basically done everything. They rehoned the cylinders and new pistons and rings, so everything's fitting absolutely perfectly. Anyway, so picked it up, and after the Formula One, we drove it home. I actually got quite sick, which wasn't ideal to be driving 8 hours a day while you're sick, but what are you going to do? So, after all of this and a $25,000 invoice, I get home and I just leave the car for a week while I go to work. On the weekend, so 1 week after we get back, on the weekend, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go see a friend of mine out at his place, and it's like an hour and a half's drive. I'm on my way out there. It's I think it's like 6 o'clock at night, something like that. And it's the first time I've sort of driven the car spiritedly. I'm not really on it. I was going hard, but not to the limit of the car, sort of like 7/10 sort of thing. It was a fairly narrow road and stuff, and it was nighttime, and you just got to be careful with animals because it was out in the bush. So I wasn't going nuts or anything. Anyway, there's a car coming the other way, so I go to slow down and pull off the road. Once the car goes past, I go to accelerate, and the revs just completely shoot up. And I'm like, oh, that's suboptimal. I don't know what's going on there. And I change down a couple of gears and nothing changes. It just keeps revving freely. So I pull over, get out of the car, and immediately it's just like oil everywhere. And it's raining, so it's really obvious. It's not raining at this point, but it's like wet. Road's damp. And there's just that kind of rainbowy oil slick all over the ground in front of the car. And there's just a huge trail of oil behind me. And I actually nearly slipped over because I got out of the car and just stood straight in a huge puddle of oil on a wet road, like it was slippery. And I go, oh my God, that's oil. And I've just had an engine rebuild done. Crap. But the thing is, I'm colorblind. So what I didn't realize is that was red. And when my friend got there, because I called him like, hey, come meet me here. Let's have a look at the car. He said, that's red. And I was like, oh, okay. It's better than the thing I just had rebuilt blowing up 1,800 Ks from where I had it rebuilt. Anyway, so I then called a tow truck, got the tow truck to take it into town, went out to his place and had a few drinks. I got the call up from the mechanic the other day, and it's not all bad news. It's just an oil cooler for the transmission. That's why there was all of that transmission fluid at the front of the car. So, obviously, a high-performance car like that, and, a lot of other cars as well, the transmission fluid heats up in an automatic transmission. So the transmission fluid has to come to the front to go through like a heat exchanger so that it can get cooled down by the air flowing over it, like your radiator for your engine coolant. I, in my mind, was like, oh, okay, but now the automatic transmission's been running without any transmission fluid in it, so it's probably damaged. But the mechanic doesn't seem to think that it's going to be a problem. That's not a part they can easily replace, so they're actually having to get it fixed, because I think it's like the pipe itself, so they're actually going to get it like fabricated rather than replacing the part, which I think is pretty good because it's probably cheaper than replacing the whole oil cooler and lines and stuff. But he's said, and I spoke to a couple of other mechanics, and they all seem to think that you can have it happen, and it's kind of fine because it happens so quickly. It probably wouldn't have done too much damage to the clutches in the auto transmission. That would be the main worry, is if it was like slowly leaking out, it would slowly lose pressure, and then the clutches would start slipping. The other thing is that the car threw code to say, oh, there's something wrong. It was like a speed variance code between the transmission and the engine. So they sort of went, oh, that doesn't make any sense. And it probably just disconnected the clutches. Anyway, I will do an update when I actually get the call to say, come pick up your car, because they have to do a rego check as well. It was booked in on the Monday after that weekend to have a rego check elsewhere, but they're going to have to do it now because it's actually out of rego by about 4 days. So I'm going to have to register it before I pick it up. I will do an update when they call me. If you enjoyed this, and if you want to see what happens, if you want to see if I am going to have to tear a transmission out and rebuild it myself, having never done it, because I'm actually out of money to spend on this car. I can't spend anymore. I've spent 25 grand on a $20,000 car. I can't spend any more. If they say it needs rebuilding, I'm going to have to do that myself, and I have barely any idea where to start. So if you want to see that, if that happens, like and subscribe, hit the bell, just let the algorithm know that you enjoyed this content and you want to see more, or you want to see that in particular. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.
Fucking car broke down right after the rebuild. See, I don't know if you can see it in the dark, but that is a bunch of fucking oil on the front of the car. Now, it's saying that it's got plenty of oil, but the transmission's free revving. So I've got a feeling that like 200 meter fucking puddle of oil is fucking tranny fluid.